In this daily drop, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SAG AFTRA and WGA strikes and what they mean to our industry and content creation as a whole. So let's go. Okay, it's Wednesday, September 20th, and when you watch this, there will be new negotiations started up between at least the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, and the studios. And if you have anything to do with this industry at all, and that just means anything to do with the industry, you probably know that originally, earlier this year, the Writers Guild of America went on strike and then followed by SAG AFTRA. Now, when the Writers Guild of America went on strike, it was a big deal because obviously, if you don't have writers, then you don't have new shows unless they're reality or the like. But when SAG-AFTRA went on strike, that's when everything really just kind of grinded to a halt, full stop. And the reason is because when you don't have anybody in front of the camera, then all of the people who work behind camera don't have a job. And so when that occurred, it just changed everything. When we had a WGA strike quite some time ago, some television shows and movies continued on, but they just couldn't use the WGA writers. And obviously, I would say with some confidence, knowing some of those movies, that things suffered because of that. But at the heart of this is really a fight for kind of the future to protect these artists, these creators, in terms of the works that they're doing. And there's a lot of things involved. I don't pretend that I understand everything that's on the table, but I do know that it's affecting so many lives. Now, I'm not union. I'm not part of the WGA, DGA, SAG-AFTRA, but I am friends with, very close friends with, and colleagues with many, many, many people who are in those unions. And then sort of completely connected to that, all of these equipment manufacturers who are making the tools that, at least for a lot of work that I'm connected to and I do education for, has so much to do with that entire industry. So you take, for instance, the rental industry, almost full stop. If you're providing stuff for concerts and reality television and for some other types of production, yes, there's some rentals happening. But at the scale and at the longevity of what an episodic television show or a feature film gives to a rental house, there's no comparison. So that industry is also hurting very, very badly. There's a lot of things that are being discussed right now, things like AI, and that's a big deal. And how does that affect things? The fact that streaming has no relationship to what used to happen with broadcast in terms of residuals and things like that. And we saw what happened to the music industry. If you're an artist and you're a musician, you make money not on album sales, not on singles, but it's when you're touring, it's merch, it's all of the things that relate to your brand, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the sales of your music. So I will say, I say on the channel, no religion, politics, science. This is kind of that gray area where it relates so much to the industry. I think it's worth having a discussion about it. And I really would love to hear people's comments, because I don't have I support the strikes, but I don't have enough information in terms of the negotiations and every aspect of it to say, this is exactly how I feel about it. And I'll give you a good example of that. I think that recently a couple of shows in the US, two in particular, Bill Maher and Drew Barrymore, decided that they were going to start up their shows again. Now, they weren't going to do anything to negate the negotiations or the terms of the strike for SAG-AFTRA or for WGA, meaning that they weren't going to have writers on the shows who are going to be writing that material. So that's obviously going to change the content as well. But their argument, their platform was that there are so many other people involved in those productions that rely upon those as their livelihood to support themselves, their families, etc., that they felt that this was the right decision. So this is where it gets so difficult. This is where hard decisions get made. And as a result of those decisions, for those two, they're both producers on those shows, producers, and obviously they're the hosts. Um, huge backlash from the unions, and so bad that both Bill Maher and Drew Barrymore have now put a pause to coming back with their shows. And it's kind of an impossible position to be in, especially if you are a talk show host, which you could argue Bill Maher is sort of news, but it's really edu news. A lot of celebrities. Drew Barrymore, of course, relies upon celebrities for a lot of the content that is a part of that show. And as a result, if they don't put it on pause, who are their guests going to be? Because anybody who's in SAG-AFTRA, or, you don't usually have WGA people sitting in chairs, though you do sometimes if they're WGA and they also are in other unions and have other roles. But who's going to be on their shows in the future if they start up their shows now? So again, sort of an impossible position to be in. I mean, the hope, of course, across the boards is that the studios and the unions come together and they actually come up with an agreement that works for both of these unions into not just the very short term, but long-term future. And there's a lot of negotiations that have to be made. SAG-AFTRA now is adding, game developers into that because so many actors are part of game development and part of those storylines and are inside of those games, essentially. So I don't know. I'm not confident that that's something that's going to get resolved anytime before the beginning of next year. But if these WGA negotiations are starting up, maybe they can come to an agreement. Maybe that's a pathway for SAG-AFTRA. It's kind of interesting because some production companies are meeting all of the demands of SAG-AFTRA, and they're allowed to start up production, like A24. I know Taylor Swift did that for her latest production. So they're meeting all of those demands. But my question is, what about the streaming platforms? You can be a production company, you can be producing a movie or a television show, but you're not necessarily the distribution platform. So maybe that's something I need to look into and understand some more, because if I were going to start up production on a film and like A24 met the demands of the union and was allowed to move forward with that production, there's still that last step, which is residuals. It's the streaming component of it, which A24 can't meet the demands of. So there's got to be some sort of compromise happening in that particular aspect between the unions and the production companies, because the production companies, unless they are in fact notification, Amazon or, one of the streaming platforms, Paramount Plus, Max, whatever it's going to be, they can't fully meet the demands of the union. So I don't know. Lots of things to think about, lots of things to discuss. It's kind of an episode where I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm not passing judgment, but I am supporting the strikes. And, when the inside group are calling each other scabs and that kind of stuff is happening, that's not good for the industry either. But I'm hoping it gets resolved sooner rather than later. Love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Daily Drop.